Everyone, today we will be exploring an alternate history scenario, how the Soviets could have won the Afghan war. Let me give you a hint, it is much easier than you think. Afghanistan has always been believed to be a graveyard of empire, but this is a false narrative. Afghanistan could have been easily won by the Soviets had they used their brains. The defeat was almost exclusively because of Brezhnev's incompetence in understanding the Afghan and global logistics of Mujahideen. The Soviet-backed Abara Karmal regime was useless in fighting on its own. Was it possible to win the war? Yes. In 1979, the Soviets were still economically strong and they had a permanent seat in UNSC. In this alternate timeline, we'll explore the possibility of Soviet victory in Afghanistan with our 5-point strategy for Soviet victory. Alternate 1979. For our strategy to work, we'll have to get rid of Brezhnev at any cost. He was just too rigid to adopt any sort of flexible plans. In this timeline, the CPSU, which is the Communist Party of Soviet Union, their Politburo decides to bring in the pragmatic Gorbachev rather than the ideologically rigid Brezhnev. This gives a chance for reform in USSR and a more pragmatic leadership willing to create alliance and understand local dynamics. Our pre-invasion strategy. Step 1. In real timeline, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan without informing India, their biggest South Asian ally and key trading partner. In our alternate timeline, however, the Soviets will involve India in planning and pre-invasion state. India's intelligence, which is the RAW Research and Analysis Wing, supports the Baloch Liberation Army. You can see their flag in the bottom right corner. They will support the Baloch Liberation Army, which has been active in Balochistan province of Pakistan since 1947, and use them to cut off Mujahideen supply lines through Pakistan and assassinate the military dictator of Pakistan, Ziaul Haq, who was the key in this Mujahideen strategy. Immediately after invasion, in real timeline, Brezhnev wasted time by installing the incompetent Babrak Karmal, whose only credential was his loyalty to Brezhnev. He was unwilling to take any risk, take any charge, and he didn't even address the corruption in the military. In our alternate timeline, however, though we have replaced Brezhnev with the more pragmatic Gorbachev, he would immediately install Dr. Mohammad Najibullah, who was the head of Khad, the Afghan intelligence, to power in 1979. In our real timeline, Gorbachev did install Mohammad Najibullah, but he installed him in 1986. By that time, war was already lost. Stabilization. Our alternate timeline ensures Soviet-backed Afghan regime is competent and reliable, while Baloch Liberation Army decimates Mujahideen supply lines and gets rid of Ziaul Haq, the Islamist Pakistani dictator. Our next step begins. Creation of an efficient Afghan army. This was a major problem under Babrak Karmal. Babrak Karmal had gutted the Afghan army by corruption and incompetence. Most soldiers only existed on the paper, and their salaries were stolen by the officers. But in our timeline, Dr. Mohammad Najibullah, who came to power in 1979, creates an efficient national army out of ethnic minorities such as Tajiks and Hazaras. Remember these two ethnicities. These two ethnicities have had personal rivalries with Taliban because they were largely Pashtun, and all these groups feel that they have been marginalized by Pashtuns for centuries. This is as part 2. Urbanization and industrialization. Afghanistan is a largely rural country even today, and rural areas are famous for the insurgents. In this timeline, however, the Soviets begin to build labor-intensive industry such as textile, steel and logistics. This pulls out the rural population into cities and reduces pool of recruits for Mujahideen. Industrialization will also help reduce dependency on Soviet logistics, which would be susceptible to Mujahideen attacks. Let me give you one important stuff over here. This is a long-term strategy. Its impact will not be felt immediately, but in 5 to 7 years. This is one thing which the Soviets completely ignored in our real timeline. However, in this alternate timeline, we would explore the possibility of Soviets building large dams on the Kabul River. Kabul River contributes to almost 17% of the Indus River system's flow during the lean season, which is winter, October to July. Creating droughts by building such dams in Pakistan from October to July, and floods from July to October, which is the monsoon season. These floods would devastate Pakistan's winter wheat and monsoon rice. Pakistan grows wheat in the winter for its domestic consumption, and it grows monsoon. In the monsoon, it grows rice for export, while flooding millions of hectares of land and causing billions in damages, diverting the resources away from Mujahideen to domestic food and flood problems. This would be a major problem for the Pakistani establishment. Within 2 to 3 years of the dams being built, the Pakistanis would be forced to surrender and beg for negotiations with the Soviets. Look at the map of Kabul River Basin. Bonus tip: with Dr. Muhammad Najibullah in power, Mujahideen supply lines cut off, the more secular nationalist Mujahideen like Ahmad Shah Massoud would be willing to trade peace for autonomy, which Dr. Najibullah was likely to accept. With this, the Afghan war is over for Soviets, and Gorbachev can order a safe retreat by 1987 with a stable DRA on its southern front, and he can begin his glasnost and perestroika reforms to make Soviet Union a market socialist economy like PRC. In this timeline, there would be a major impact as there would be no terrorism in this timeline. The Mujahideen never managed to take over Kabul. The Soviets retreat peacefully, and Pakistan would be decimated by our insurgency and water politics. Najibullah's government never collapses, thus, there is no terrorism in South Asia.